Welcome to Velvet Confessions. If this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We tell stories that stay with you long after the lights go out. And before we begin tonight, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. We love knowing who's out there listening. Now, settle in, because this one is going to make your blood boil before it makes you cheer. She set down her champagne flute so carefully, so deliberately, that the stem didn't make a sound against the marble table. And that was the moment Harriet Calloway knew, not suspected, not feared, knew that the brooch pinned to that woman's lapel was hers. Not a replica, not something similar hers. The Calloway leaf, a hand-enameled Art Nouveau piece commissioned in 1923 by her great-grandmother Edith, who had worn it on the day she opened the first Calloway textile mill in Hamilton, Ontario. The piece had survived 2 world wars, a house fire, and 4 generations of women who understood what it meant to build something with your hands and your nerve. It was not a piece of jewelry, it was a document, and it was currently pinned to the lapel of a 26-year-old named Zara, who was laughing at something Harriet's husband had just whispered in her ear. Harriet picked up her champagne glass again and finished what was left in a single, measured sip. She smiled at the woman across from her, Patricia Wentworth, the philanthropist who had organized this entire gala, and said, "Patricia, you've absolutely outdone yourself tonight. The floral arrangements alone." And Patricia, delighted, launched into a story about the florist from Yorkville, and Harriet listened and nodded and said, in all the right places, while somewhere behind her left shoulder, her husband Desm was draping his arm around a woman wearing a dead woman's brooch. Harriet Calloway was 44 years old. She had spent the better part of 20 years building Calloway Studio, a mid-sized interior architecture firm that had, over the past decade, grown into one of the most respected design practices in Ontario. She had done this while also raising 2 children, managing a household, and being what everyone in their social circle described as an incredibly gracious woman, which was a polite way of saying she smiled through things that would have made other people scream. She had married Desmond Calloway when she was 25, and he was 31. He was handsome in the way that well-maintained men often are, not remarkable on his own, but assembled well. He had a good jaw and good shoes and an easy laugh, and in the early years he had made Harriet feel like the most interesting person in any room. That was his particular gift, making people feel seen. She found out later, much later, that he gave that gift to many, many people. The first time she suspected something was wrong was about 2 years ago, when she noticed that Desmond had started arriving home later than usual and offering explanations she hadn't asked for. Men who are innocent don't explain. They walk through the door, pour themselves a drink, ask what's Varbermer. Men who are guilty walk through the door already talking. She didn't say anything then. She noted it. The second time was when she found a receipt. Not hidden, just carelessly left in the inside pocket of a jacket he'd asked her to drop at the dry cleaner. For a dinner, at Canoe, Toronto's best view table, on a night he'd told her he was in Mississauga for a client meeting. She didn't say anything then either. She photographed the receipt with her phone, filed it away, and had the jacket dry cleaned. Harriet was not a woman who acted without information. She had learned this from her mother, who had learned it from Edith, whose philosophy on conflict was reportedly, never move until you can see the whole board. She had started working with a forensic accountant named Jeff Strand 4 months ago. Not a lawyer, not yet. Jeff first, because her instinct told her this wasn't just about another woman. Her instinct told her this was also about money. Desmond was the CFO of a mid-sized logistics company called Northgate. He was good with numbers. He was also, as it turned out, good at moving them. Jeff had taken 6 weeks, and then he had sat across from Harriet at a coffee shop on King Street West and slid a folder across the table and said quietly, "I want to be careful about how I say this." And she had said, "Say it plainly, please." So he did. Over a period of approximately 3 years, Desmond had been redirecting funds from a jointly held investment account, one that Harriet had substantially contributed to, from Calloway Studios' revenue into a series of transfers that ended, eventually, in a personal account she had no knowledge of, The total amount moved was just under $900,000. Harriet had looked at the number for a long time. Then she had said, "What do you need from me to make sure this is airtight?" Jeff told her. She provided it. She had also, somewhere in the previous 3 months, noticed that the Callaway leaf was no longer in the fireproof safe in her study. She had gone looking for it because her daughter Sylvie was getting engagement photos taken in the spring and had asked if she could borrow it. The safe was still locked. The code was still the same, but the brooch was gone. She checked the safe twice. She checked every jewelry case in the house. She checked the cedar chest where she kept things she'd inherited from her mother. Nothing. She hadn't asked Desmond. She had simply noted it. And then 4 days ago, when she'd received the gala program in the mail and seen that Desmond's company was one of the event sponsors, meaning he'd be there, meaning he'd find a reason to bring Zara, because men like Desmond always found a way to keep their two worlds uncomfortably close. She'd had a feeling, a specific, crystalline, horrible feeling. She was right. The gala was being held at the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum, in the Michael Lee Chin crystal, which was all geometric glass and ambient light, and the kind of architectural drama that Harriet would normally appreciate. Tonight she noticed the geometry only peripherally, the way you notice weather when you're running late. Desmond had arrived separately. They had stopped pretending to coordinate their schedules about 8 months ago by unspoken mutual agreement. He was across the rooms now, near the bar, in a charcoal suit she had picked out for him 3 Christmases ago with Zara at his side. Zara's dress was steel blue, sleeveless, well-fitted in a way that suggested she'd had help. The Callaway leaf was pinned just below her left collarbone. Under the crystal's light, the enamel glowed, the green the ambient light, exactly as it always had. Harriet recognized it the way you recognize a family member in a crowd. The way you recognize a family member in a crowd. Before your brain has processed it, she spoke to Patricia for another 4 minutes. She complimented the silent auction catalog. She asked after Patricia's son, who was at UBC now. She was present and warm and entirely composed, and the whole time a very quiet part of her was calculating. She excused herself at 7:42 and went to find her friend Claudette. Claudette Ozzie was a family lawyer. She was also the person who had, over a bottle of Riesling 18 months ago, looked Harriet in the eye and said, "If you ever need to move on this, call me before you do anything else." Harriet had stored that away with the receipt and the safe code and everything else she'd been quietly storing. She found Claudette near the museum's Greece exhibit, examining a catalog. "I need 5 minutes," Harriet said. Claudette looked at her face and said, "Take my arm and walk." They walked. Harriet told her about the brooch. Quietly, efficiently, without editorial. Claudette listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Harriet valued most about her. When Harriet finished, Claudette said, "And you have provenance documentation for the piece?" "I have the original commission records, my great-grandmother's estate papers, a photograph from 1931 of Edith wearing it, and a professional appraisal from 2019. Everything is in my Dropbox. Jeff has copies." Then she said, "Okay, here's what I want you to do." "Nothing yet. Give me 40 minutes. Nothing yet. I need to make a call." "To who?" "Someone who can help us document once an lapel before anyone in this room moves." Harriet went back to the main hall. She ordered sparkling water. She was introduced to a city councilor and discussed the waterfront development on the Portlands. She laughed at the right moments. She kept Desmond and Zara in her peripheral vision, at all times the way a chess player watches the board. Not staring, just tracking. At 8:15, a woman Harriet didn't recognize approached Zara near the silent auction tables. She was soft-spoken, professional-looking, with a badge that suggested she was one of the event's volunteer coordinators. She admired Zara's brooch. She asked about it. Zara, who was the kind of person who enjoyed being admired, described it, where she'd gotten it, how much she loved it. The woman nodded warmly and moved on. She was in fact a colleague of Claudette's. She had a very good phone camera, and she had recorded every second of that conversation. At 8:47, Harriet approached her husband. Desmond saw her coming and did what he always did when he was uncomfortable. He smiled first and hoped it would be enough. "Harriet," You look wonderful. Thank you. She looked at Zara. I don't think we've been introduced. The next 30 seconds were among the most uncomfortable of Desmond's life, which was somewhat gratifying. Zara, to her credit, handled the introduction with a kind of bewildered composure. She said her name. She said it was nice to meet Harriet. She reached out to shake her hand, and the Calloway leaf caught the light again. Harriet looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Zara's face and said, calmly and pleasantly, "That's a beautiful where you got it, Zara." A glanced at a micro-movement, the kind that tells you everything. It was a gift, she said. How lovely, Harriet said. You know, it's quite similar to a piece that's been in my family for 4 generations. An Art Nouveau piece commissioned in Hamilton in 1923. I noticed the enamel work immediately. She tilted her head slightly. May I? She reached out very gently and angled the brooch toward the light. She did not touch it. She only looked. Remarkable, she said softly. Desmond said, Harriet. Desmond, she said, and her voice was so quiet that he stopped. I'm just admiring the piece. She straightened, smiled at Zara, and said, enjoy the rest of your evening. And then she walked away, back toward Claudette, who was waiting near the coat check. What happened next? Harriet did not witness directly. She heard it described, later by 2 separate people. Zara, who was underneath everything, a reasonably intelligent young woman who had been told remarkably little about where the brooch came from, apparently stood very still for a moment after Harriet left. Then she turned to Desmond and said, quietly, it wasn't a question. It was the specific sentence of someone who already knows the answer and is giving you one last chance to lie about it. Desmond said something. Zara's expression did not change. She unpinned the brooch from her lapel with 2 fingers, held it out toward him, and said, I don't want it. He didn't take it, so... She set it down on the nearest available surface, which happened to be the silent auction table, next to a framed print of the Niagara Escarpment, and she picked up her clutch and she left. Claudette had already made 2 calls and sent 1 email by the time Harriet reached her. They stepped outside into the cool April air, the kind of Toronto spring night where you can still see your breath, and Claudette said, Jeff's documentation plus what we recorded tonight is more than enough. We move next week, criminal or civil first? Both. But we lead with the financial. It's cleaner, it's documented, and it sets the tone. Claudette paused. He moved nearly $1 million. Harriet, I know. And the brooch, removing it from a jointly titled domicile with intent to transfer. I know, Harriet said again. Claudette looked at her. Are you all right? Harriet considered the question with the same seriousness she gave everything. The crystal glowed behind them. Inside, the gala was still humming along, glasses clinking, someone at the podium thanking a long list of donors. Somewhere in there, Desmond was standing next to an empty space where Zara had been. I've been all right for a while, Harriet said. I've been all right for a while, Harriet said. I think I just needed to see it with my own eyes. She did not go back inside because of Desmond. She went back inside because Patricia Wentworth was about to give a speech, and Harriet had helped design the new East Wing of the Children's Hospital that the gala was fundraising for, and she'd be damned if she was going to miss it because of him. She found her seat. She listened to Patricia speak with warmth and precision about what the new wing would mean for families in the city. Harriet had spent 14 months on that project, the sight lines from the patient rooms, the acoustic dampening in the corridor so children could sleep, the small courtyard with the maple trees that could be seen from the beds. She was proud of it in the way that you're proud of things you made with real care. At the end of the speech, when the room applauded, Harriet applauded too. Desmond, she noticed, had left. What followed in the weeks after was neither dramatic nor particularly pleasant. But it was orderly. Harriet had always preferred order. The papers were filed. The accounts were frozen. A forensic audit of the joint investment account was opened formally, and Jeff's preliminary findings were submitted as evidence. Desmond's company was notified of the investigation, as required, and his access to certain financial instruments was suspended pending review. He called her twice in the first week. She let both calls go to voicemail and forwarded the recordings to Claudette. He showed up at the house once. She had anticipated this. She had changed the door code the morning after the gala, and she had also, on Claudette's advice, filed a formal notice with the court that she was seeking sole occupancy of the matrimonial home pending the division of assets. A constable arrived the same afternoon to confirm the notice had been served. Desmond stood on the front step for about 4 minutes. Then he left. The Calloway leaf was recovered a courier the following Tuesday. Zara had boxed it herself, wrapped it in tissue, and included a handwritten note that said only, "I'm sorry." Harriet read the note once. She put it in the same file where she kept the dry cleaning receipt and Jeff's folder and every other thing she had quietly saved. Her daughter Sylvie called that evening. "Mum," she said, "someone told me what happened at the gala. Are you?" "I'm fine," Harriet said. "Are you actually fine, or are you fine in the way where I shouldn't push it?" Harriet smiled. Sylvie had always been perceptive. She'd gotten it from her grandmother. "Both," she said. "I'm genuinely fine. And I also don't need to talk about it right now. Can we talk about the engagement photos instead?" So they talked about the engagement photos. About which park, which light, whether Sylvie wanted structured shots or candid ones. Harriet said candid, always, because structured photos looked like what people thought memories should look like, and candid ones looked like what memories actually were. At the end of the call, Sylvie said, "The brooch. You still have it? It came back yesterday." A pause. "Good. I want to wear it in the photos, Mum. If that's still okay." "It's more than okay," Harriet said. "That's what it's for." The formal proceedings took most of the following year. They were handled, as Harriet had planned, with documentation and without theatrics. There were several moments when Desmond's lawyers tried to characterize the joint investment account in ways that Jeff's records directly contradicted. There were moments that were hard, not because of anger, but because 20 years is 20 years, and even a marriage that ends badly contains things that were real. But Harriet had the board. She'd had it for a long time. She simply waited until she could see all of it. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday in February. Claudette called her at 2:30 with the details. Harriet was at her drafting table when the call came in, working on a residential project in the Beaches. A couple, renovating their first house, modest budget, a lot of heart. She had 3 pencil sketches open in front of her. She listened to Claudette, read the numbers, the recovered funds plus interest, the matrimonial home, the share of the business assets, the pension division. When Claudette finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "Harriet, it's a good outcome." "It is," Harriet said. Harriet looked at her sketches. The couple had told her they wanted the kitchen to feel like the center of the house, somewhere that pulled people in. She'd been thinking about a long island, open shelving, a window seat at the far end, where the light came through in the afternoon. "I feel like getting back to work," she said, and she did. The Calloway leaf now sits in a glass display box on Harriet's mantel, not in the safe, not in the cedar chest, but out, where it can be seen. Sylvie wore it in the engagement photos, just as she'd asked. In one of them, caught in that candid way that Harriet loves, Sylvie is laughing at something her fiancé said, one hand raised. The brooch catching the early spring light over Riverdale Park. It looks, in that photo, exactly like what it is. Something that has survived everything thrown at it, and come out the other side, still intact. Harriet has the photo framed on her desk at Calloway Studio. If you were to visit and ask her about it, she would tell you about Edith, about the Hamilton Mill, about what it means to build something and protect it. She would tell you the whole story, quietly, and without performance, and when she finished, she would offer you a coffee and turn back to whatever she was working on, because that is the kind of woman Harriet Calloway is, and in the end, that was always going to be enough.